And when I'm trying to explain to little children what's going on, I say it's like, Pinocchio's nose gets longer, but it doesn't mean Pinocchio gets taller, just the nose that grew. And in the same way, all that happened with the Green Revolution was plants were turned into dwarf plants because the tall plants, our native seeds, can't tolerate chemicals. They have a tendency to lodge, or lodging in agriculture. I call it the plant satyagraha. Satyagraha is Gandhi's word for the fight for truth, for non-cooperation. And the plant is saying, no, sorry, chemicals, go away, I don't want to cooperate with you. So they couldn't introduce chemicals to India, though they tried from 52 onwards, till 65. Because by then, Norman Borlaug had managed to make dwarf plants that would take up more chemicals. But we were told these are high-yielding plants. They were high-response plants. They didn't produce more food. Not only did we lose a lot of food, we lost our soils, we lost our water. And as so much of the new work, in my book Soil Not Oil, but more and more we are recognizing we're losing the air. Chemical industrial agriculture uses 10 times more water to produce the same amount of food. And that's why our water is disappearing. Our soils are dying. They're desertified. 10% of the land of Punjab is today a desert. And it's been farmed for 5,000 years, nothing happened. 10 years of chemical farming, finished. Now, genetic engineering is often called the second green revolution. And it's made to look like the first green revolution was a miracle. And it's very interesting that Norman Borlaug, who got the Nobel Peace Prize for bringing these dwarf varieties and chemicals, and he even said, if I was a parliamentarian, I'd jump up every day and say, fertilizers, give me more fertilizers. I think Bill Gates is doing the same these days, give Africa more fertilizers. The entire input cost was so high, it would not have worked without initially subsidies and later debt. Now we're being told, yes, this green revolution is running out of steam. If you look at the graphs, they go like this. In sustainable agriculture, the graph doesn't ever deplete, it just keeps going up. Because when you nourish the soil, when you protect the biodiversity, you can constantly co-evolve with nature to produce more with the earth. So 20 years ago, or even more than 20 years ago, 25 years ago, the big chemical giants started to sell this new miracle. And I remember the debates in those days. They'd say, oh, we'll never ever have hunger again, because now with genetic engineering, we'll grow plants on the moon. They literally used to say that. We'll grow food on toxic dumps, and the Sahara will be a breadbasket. After these 20 years, what do we have? Two applications. Plants that have been engineered to tolerate higher doses of herbicide, which are called Roundup-ready plants, and plants that have been engineered with a toxic gene called Bt, which now produces a poison in the plant itself, and it's supposed to control one family of pests. What do we see as a result of these two applications? In the United States, 15 million acres have been overtaken by superweeds that can't be destroyed by Roundup. And Monsanto now gives $12 an acre to say, go get more lethal herbicides like Agent Orange. They're also hiring new kinds of slave labor to physically uproot these weeds, because very often you can't get rid of them at all with a herbicide. In India, the situation is even more serious because we are a land of small farmers. small farmers produce food. And you know, one of the facts that very often forgotten is we've been made to think that these corporations like Monsanto that controls the seed, Cargill that controls the trade, Walmart that controls the retail, that they are the providers of food on the world level. 80% of the food in the world still comes from small farms. In my country, 70% people live on the land. They're feeding 1.2 billion people. And most of the work on small farms is done by women. You know, women are the primary farmers of the world in most parts of the world. But we've been made to believe that the marginal situation, the corporate-dominated agriculture, is the only form of agriculture we have. But it's a minority. The majority is small farms, family farms, very often in third world countries, if the Green Revolution hasn't destroyed our land, biodiverse farms. And they're providing the food security of the world. And that food security rests on the seed. Seed is the first link in the food chain. Now, both the Green Revolution as well as genetic engineering have been an assault on native seeds. I see it as a kind of colonialism. Because, you know, just like languages are put down, when English starts to dominate, other languages are put down. When racism starts to dominate, other colors are put down. When sexism dominates, women are put down. And there's a whole vocabulary that has been created around the seed issue. They call native varieties primitive cultivars. They call the industrially bred varieties improved, elite. And everything we see in all other forms of discrimination are now introduced into the seed. Now, there's nothing like an inferior seed, because seed is life. And how can some life be inferior to other life? All life is equal. And life in its diversity is vital. So when peasants, for example, peasants of Mexico, will grow their corn, they'll grow it with beans, they'll grow it with other things. When our farmers will grow, they'll grow millets. You know, millets are my absolutely favorite food. You think it's just for birds, but it's probably the most nutritious food on this planet. And we call it forgotten foods, which are the foods of the future. Why are millets called millets? Because each seed gives rise to 1,000,000 seeds. That's why millet, from million. Yeah? Can you imagine the multiplication factor? Multiply by 1,000,000. Now, that's where Monsanto gets very angry. How can you become 1,000,000? Without my permission. So what is their innovation? Turn one seed into a zero seed, which is the terminator. Seed means that which reproduces on its own. Now they want seed to not reproduce, to be sterile. In any case, even hybrid seeds don't breed two. Farmers have to buy them every year. And everywhere in the world, you move from Green Revolution crops that introduce the chemicals, then you get into hybrids, which you can't save, and then very rapidly from there to genetic engineering. I started to work on the seed because in 1987, I don't know if Jim is still in this room. He had to go. But, you know, it wasn't called etc. then, it was called RAFI, the Rural Advancement Fund International. The DAG Hammarskjöld Foundation, which was Memorial Foundation for the first UN Secretary